Hi everyone, I'm Steve Lee. Welcome for one final time to my car for In-CarAlpha episode 8. We are coming to the end of this amazing journey that we have been on. I've enjoyed it, I've loved it actually, and it's been amazing to have so many people watching and interacting with it. This is episode 8. As I say, I've called it New Family, and it is all about the church. Before we kick off with ideas and thoughts from me, let's go to the street one final time and hear some views from ordinary members of the public.
What do I think about the church? I wouldn't go to church.
Yeah, I go to church nearly every day.
I normally go to church at Christmas with my family.
I used to go to church when I was younger with my mum, but I used to get bored and not really listen, so...
Church, I think it's actually a really good thing to go to.
Yeah. I like kind of what it stands for in the sense of a community and kind of what it brings.
I don't really like the church.
Maybe a bit old-fashioned.
A bit backwards sometimes.
I believe that church can teach people good morals.
You know, I know people who go to church religiously and then they'll be in a nightclub doing some scandalous things, you know, so does that make them a better person than me?
I think it's a beautiful place to be. It's really calm and peaceful, and it's lovely when you're there.
The centre of all towns, centre of all cities, centre of all villages.
If there was a God, I think that he'd be pretty happy for people to just recognise he exists and not, necessarily go to church every Sunday or something.
I don't know. I've got mixed feelings about it, really.
I do understand that the church is a bit of a weird one for people to get their head around. It's hugely diverse. That really is just a reflection of society and the type of people that are in society. People who become Christians, of course, are a cross-section of people. I remember thinking growing up that Christians were very boring. And then I realised that some Christians are boring, but they were probably boring before they became Christian. And becoming a Christian allowed them to be boring and Christian at the same time. I have many, many friends and colleagues who are Christians who are not boring. But unfortunately, I think the media presents Christianity, the church, in a certain light, and it is not really representative of the huge diversity that is in Christian churches in this country and throughout the world. Some churches do come across quite dull. I understand that. People often think that it's basically old buildings that really are there to create boring and old-fashioned events and old songs and all that kind of stuff. On the other hand, some people think the church is quite wacky, even fanatical, singing, cheering, chanting, dancing, clapping, people putting their hands in the air, and a general sense of celebration. I go to churches like that. I've spoken at many, many churches like that, from a small group to many, many hundreds. And I've also been to quite a few football games in my time, and do you know what? A lot of what happens in some of the big stadiums and even the medium-sized and small stadiums can involve a lot of this kind of activity as well, and there's not so much difference between what you see at a football game to what you would see at a church. When you find a father, you find a family. And just like a family, which is not a spectator sport in any way, church is the same. Church is not a spectator sport. And if I can use the analogy of football one more time, it's about getting on the pitch. It's not about sitting in the stands. We can all comment on something without really having first-hand experience of it. And a lot of people have strong views, even negative views, about the church, but they've not actually experienced much of it. This In-CarAlpha adventure that we've been on is something that I would describe as an invitation to a conversation. That's what this is all about. It's why I did it. It's why I came up with the idea, because in this season that we're living in, I wanted to create opportunity for people to hear what it is that Christians believe, but maybe in a non-religious way. And I hope I have had a measure of success in doing that. But I would be not telling you the truth if I didn't say that my heart's desire is for every single person who is engaged with In-CarAlpha, that they would become a follower of Jesus as a result and join a church. No church is perfect. As we've already said, it's hugely diverse, but churches are not perfect because they are made up of imperfect people like you and I. And as we all know, we've got all sorts of baggage and back catalogue and hang-ups and weaknesses and problems and mistakes. That they are the things that hallmark our lives. And so it's not surprising that, just like any other human organisation, the church is going to be full of imperfections. And I say to people quite often, if you find a perfect church, don't join it, because you'll end up ruining it, because you're imperfect in the same way that I am. When we respond to an invitation to receive Jesus Christ personally into our lives, church is the place where that is worked out, because that is where we find family, it's where we find community. Going to church doesn't make you a Christian. An old quote from a guy called Keith Green, who was an amazingly non-religious, radical follower of Jesus Christ. He made this statement, I think probably in the late 70s. Going to church doesn't make you a Christian any more than going to McDonald's makes you a hamburger. I really like that. So it's not that going to church or joining a church makes you a Christian. We become a Christian when we make a personal decision to say sorry to God and to accept and understand that when Jesus lived, died and rose from the dead, he made a way for our debt, our wrongdoing to be cancelled out, to be eradicated, to be expunged. And he in dying on the cross and rising from the dead, he built a bridge for us to get back to God as creator and father. That's how you become a Christian. You don't become a Christian by going to a Christian meeting, whatever that looks like, or joining a church. But as I've said, church is the context where it is worked out, where that decision is actually lived out in the context of a discipleship process, which is what it means to be a follower of Christ. You can't be a secret Christian. You can only be a Christian in the context of community. It's a private, personal decision, but it is worked out with other people. Here's another video. It's 3 today. This is one of my big stories, which I know those of you who have followed this adventure over these last 8 episodes will be quite familiar with, because we've embedded one, included one in each one of my In-CarAlpha presentations. This is the story. We actually filmed it in the Netherlands, and it's quite an unusual take on church. It centres around the Battle of Arnhem in 1944. And for the second half of it, it's just a few minutes long as normal, but for the second half of it, it focuses in on a very unusual church and a very unusual story. This is called Angel of Arnhem. In attack, most daring. In defence, most cunning. In endurance, most steadfast. They performed a feat of arms that will be remembered and recounted as long as the virtues of courage and resolution have the power to move the hearts of men. The words of Winston Churchill in honour of the men of the British 1st Airborne Division at Arnhem. Operation Market Garden was a huge airborne assault to capture the bridges of the Netherlands in September 1944. This one over the River Rhine in Arnhem was the last one on the list. The Allies would then be rattling the gates of Germany, and World War II would be over by Christmas 1944. All very simple in theory. History records what happened here as a catastrophe, A huge enemy counterattack completely overran the British lines, pushing a remnant of the 1st Airborne back to the village of Oosterbeek. Arnhem was a bridge too far. A beautiful church in a rural Dutch village, but not everything is as it appears. According to the sign here outside the door, the most poignant event in the 1,000 years of history around this building was its total destruction during the Battle of Arnhem. The day before war came here to Oosterbeek, it was a normal Sunday. The people came out of the church, and Kate de Horst and her children came out of the old vicarage and looked up and saw the British 1st Airborne Division parachuting out of the clouds. A close inspection of the outside of the church reveals the damage that was caused when 150 soldiers ran for cover inside the church among the candles and the pews. The commanding officer then stood in the pulpit and addressed his most unlikely congregation with these words: "We will stay here and hope. We will stick together and we will fight for our lives." The following day, the church and the old vicarage descended into full-scale carnage. Over there in the house, the Ter Horst's family furniture was thrown out into the garden, and the children were taken down into the cellar, including a newborn baby, as the house was transformed into an aid post. For 4 days, Kate de Horst comforted the wounded and prayed for the dying. She took water from the boiler and then from the toilet to keep the men alive. As she walked around the house from man to man, reading the Bible to the soldiers, they called her the Angel of Arnhem. A harrowing story of a time long gone, when the peace of a rural village was overrun by war, and a church of all places became the battlefield. Churches, for a lot of us, conjure up images of christenings, weddings and carol services, not really desperate struggles for survival. But here's an interesting thought. According to the Bible, the word church has really nothing to do with buildings at all. It's about people who are reconciled to a Father because of the life, death and resurrection of Jesus, his Son. A people called to stand together in a shared purpose, to care for the hurting and to do the things that Jesus did. So when that officer stood up in the pulpit inside the church and told his men to stick together and fight for each other, maybe that was a brutal yet profound picture of life in peacetime also. Maybe that's the very thing that should be said in every church every week. Maybe that's what the church is really about. So let me wrap up what I want to say today by giving you 3 words that I do believe is a way of explaining what the church is. The church is many things, I do understand that, and we could spend many hours getting forensic with what the Bible describes as the church. But 3 things with 3 short quotes from the Bible, which I hope will give you a little bit of an understanding of where I'm coming from. So the 3 words are community, body and house. Community, body and house. The first one is community. This is taken from the book of Acts, which is really the opening phases of the church after Jesus had lived, died, rose again and ascended back to heaven. And the baton was placed in the hands of his followers, his disciples, his team. And this is really a snapshot of those very powerful early weeks of the church. in Jerusalem and the area around it. This is what it said. All the believers, the Christians, lived in harmony, holding everything in common. They sold whatever they owned and they pooled their resources so that each person's need was met. Church is a community. It's a community of people, as I said in the video just now, who are called to stand together in a divine purpose. Somebody once said, a guy called Howard Snyder, I love what he said, and this is how he described the church. The church is the joyful community of those who have traded everything for the privilege of banding together around the person of Jesus and the cause of his kingdom. Church is a community of people who have been set apart by God because of a decision to say yes to Jesus, his son, and are now called to live life together. Having said that, it's not exclusive. It is incredibly inclusive, or it should be in every context. John Wesley said many years ago, centuries ago, the church is the only human organisation that exists for the benefit of its non-members. Church is a community. The second thing is that church is a body. What on earth do I mean by that? Let's go back into the Bible. This is from the book of Romans and chapter 12, verse 5, reading from the Message, which I've talked a lot about, a modern translation or paraphrase of the Bible, which I absolutely love. This is what it says. In this way, we are all like various parts of the human body, each part getting its meaning from the body as a whole, not the other way round. The body we are talking about is Christ's body of chosen people. So you get what's going on there, I hope. It's a picture of the human body and explaining that there are many diverse parts of the human body: limbs, muscles, bones, ligaments, sinews, tissue, all of these things, incredibly diverse, but they come together under the head, which the Bible clearly says is Jesus, but together we find purpose and unity and meaning, and we can make sense of the whole thing only when we are connected and interconnected with one another. And my third word, so we've covered community, we've covered body, and we've covered house, all very briefly, I understand that. We've covered community and body, and the third one is house. And my final verse from the Bible for this particular session, and in fact the whole of In-CarAlpha, is taken from 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 5. You yourselves, so this is Peter writing to a church, you yourselves are like living stones being built up as a spiritual house. Lots of people, when they see a church in their mind's eye, they see bricks and mortar. They see a building with a roof and probably a cross on the top. But you know, the church has got nothing to do with buildings. Buildings are functional spaces. They are not spiritual spaces. The building, the house of God, is actually about people who are cemented together by a shared hope, by a shared purpose, and the love of the Father. That's why we call the church family. We call it the family of God. So it is a house, but it's not a physical house. It is a spiritual house. The message of Jesus has never changed. Come as you are, belong as you journey towards believing, and then allow him to restore and transform your life. That is the church, the glorious church of Jesus Christ in all its diversity, and it waits for you to be a part of it. Let me read that to you again. Come as you are, belong as you journey towards believing, and then allow him, God, to restore you and transform your life. Let me finish by saying once again, church is not a perfect place. I meet people all the time who tragically have been very badly affected and hurt by people and organisations that exist, who should exist to care for people. And it's very easy to judge books by covers. I want to say to you that the church is not a perfect environment, but it's there for us to work out our commitment to Jesus and the choice that we make to follow him. You can only do that in the context of the community, the body, and the house that is the church. Let me say once again, thank you so much for giving me your time to engage with these sessions. My great hope and desire is that it's maybe peeled the onion for you a little bit, taken away maybe some inherited religious thinking that we've all got because it's part of our upbringing, and presented the real Jesus in a way that you can understand it, but also that you would understand this great invitation to receive his love and his forgiveness and the brand new start that is available to each one of us. Once again, let me encourage you to interact in the normal way, but more importantly, to talk to Christians that you know who maybe have invited you onto the In-CarAlpha journey. And I really hope that I get an opportunity to speak to you, maybe face to face, or maybe like this online in the future. God bless you all, every single one of you, wherever you might be. So there you go, guys. That was In-CarAlpha. Thanks ever so much for connecting with it. Really miss seeing you all face to face in Winchester, of course, but I'm sure that will all change one day. Just to say that Jonathan and I are going to chat about how we can stay connected, but obviously 10 a.m. on Sundays for Hope Online is a great place to stay connected in that way. And I will hope to see you all really soon. God bless you guys.